Hello, friends. Welcome back to another brand new episode of Learn with Musa. I hope all of my YouTube friends are doing great and enjoying what you're doing currently. At this moment, I'm really enjoying making these tutorials for you. But like they say, life is really unpredictable. We don't know what our state will be for tomorrow. But I really don't want to put my focus for tomorrow, friends. Let's focus for today, for this moment, and do everything possible for today. Let's face life in that style, one thing at a time and all energy just for today. Okay, friends, no more philosophies and let's jump straight into today's topic. It's all about API authentication and authorization. I hope you have watched all the previous episodes in this series called Everything About REST APIs. I have included those episodes links in the description box below, or you can watch them in sequential order from the playlist. The link is available at right hand side now. Okay, friends. So what's the big deal about API authentication? Do we need authentication for APIs first of all? I know you said yes for it. And I know you thinking that it's the fundamental stuff and a very stupid question from Musa. Because no resource owner would allow anyone to access the resources without their permission, isn't it? On the same line of thought, when a service provider develop an endpoint and keep a resource behind it, they will also make sure that adequate security is in place in order to make sure that a client can perform any actions only when the client is authorized to do so. The application server can grant this kind of permissions to any resource consumer, say a client, only when the client let the application server know who they are. This process of sending the credentials from the client to the server in an either plain text or in an encrypted form by using an authentication protocol is called authentication. It's the act done by the server to verify the credentials of the connection attempt sent by the client. If the server cannot recognize the credentials sent by the client, or if the client sent a bad wrong credentials, server can reject such connection attempt and no resources should be accessible for the client. And we already know that request methods like post, put, patch, and delete, etc. alter the resources. So developers always put them behind the authentication wall. In majority of cases, a GET request also requires authentication because the service providers do not want the data to be read by everyone out there in the world. So friends, authentication is not just a good to have feature, but it is a must for any services or products that runs over the network. And on the web, there are two main ways to authenticate yourself. The first one is with a username and password. It is also called as basic authentication. And we have a second one with a secret token, which includes method like OAuth. In last couple of videos, we have been playing with GitHub API to create, modify repos, etc. Right? And you have seen how I was sending the authentication details using curl in CMD to GitHub server. I was using basic username and password. Whenever I send a wrong credential, GitHub rightly informed me that it's a bad credential and it did not allow me to work with the repo resources. I'll demo this again now, friends, and I will show you something very interesting. Even if you use basic authentication and send username and password, how this info is being getting sent to the server. Okay, friends, let's get into the demo now. Let us understand more about authentication mechanisms and how basically a client can send username and password so that the server will be able to identify this client and server will send the right kind of response. So again, I'm gonna use command prompt with my favorite tool called curl. By the way, if you are curious about how I have changed the CMD background color here. I like to change my CMD background color very often because I don't really want to stick with one boring background color. I keep changing it. So you can go to CMD prompt, top bar, right click, you see a properties option, then you have colors. Here you can change the screen background, screen, text, etc. Cool, isn't it? Okay, so let's get back into the main business now. So I'm using curl. The kind of request I use is get. I use a username and I'm going to hit on GitHub API. So the endpoint I'm using is this one. So basically I just want a simple endpoint, right? Just wanted to fetch the user information here. So I'll use a verbose command also here. So the kind of authentication method that we are gonna use here is called basic authentication. It's the most straightforward and easiest option. Nowadays, for production applications, people don't use basic authentication. Most of the people don't use because it's not the safest one, though it is the easiest and straightforward. This is not the safest one. For more secured business applications, people use authentication methods like OAuth, kind of an advanced one. Anyway, we are not going to discuss about those in this tutorial. Let us understand the concept first. Maybe probably in the future we can have videos on that. So we are using basic authentication. So let's see as a client how curl will be sending these user credentials to GitHub server. So I'm going to enter. So it will ask me for a password. Right now I'm going to enter a wrong password purposefully, and let's see. So when I enter a wrong password, you can see that GitHub is rightly sending. It is complaining that it is a bad credential. So I won't give you a response. So this is a very valid one. So as a client, I am failing here to identify myself. I'm not able to tell GitHub server that, hey, this is me. I'm a genuine client. Give me the response. I failed in that. So I couldn't retrieve the resource content. So this is really expected. So this is the fundamental idea behind authentication. If you wanted to fetch any resource, you should be a genuine one. You should be able to identify yourself. You should be able to tell who you are. The server will verify that, then only the server will return the response. So next time I will enter a right password. Dun, dun, dun. So yes, so I put a right password. Now I got the response here. And you can see the kind of response I got is 200. Okay. Now the critical thing that we need to understand that how as a client this username and password is getting transmitted to the server. So you can see that it is being passed as an authorization header, and you can see the kind of mechanism we use is basic, and there is some random characters here, right? So this is basically a base 64 encoded version of your username and password. So base 64 is basically an encoding mechanism. So your username and password is encoded into this kind of 64 characters, and it is being transmitted over the HTTP protocol. So this is how your credentials will be sent to the server. And you can see that this is being sent as an authorization header. Right now we have been talking about authentication, right? So this might be slightly confusing for you, but if you think, I mean, like, why it is using an authorization header here. But if you think from API endpoint perspective, any API endpoint is really pointing to a resource, right? So to retrieve a resource, you need some kind of authorization, right? If you're not authorized, that resource is going to be available for you, right? So if you think from that perspective, this makes sense. But the fundamental idea is that we are sending credential as an encoded one here. So you can, yeah, so you can use any base 64 decode tool, and you can encode decode these characters. So I'll just show you that also. So this is the fundamental reason I told basic authentication is not really safe. So I'll use some online tool called this one. So I'm going to input that encoded version of this. So when I encode, you can see the real username and password here, right? Musa knows. And I will change this. Definitely, I'm gonna change this after this tutorial. I don't want the entire world to know this. Yeah, so I'm just kidding. So yeah, I'll change anyway. Okay, so the idea is that when you try to send username and password, this is encoded and it is put as part of your basic authentication. So as a client, it is really important that you authenticate yourself. Only then the server will be able to identify you and will be able to send the response. Okay, friends. Now let's check about authorization and how it is different from authentication. One thing to keep in mind is authorization comes into picture only after a successful authentication of client at the server side. As a client, you might have successfully got authenticated and server understood and allowed your identity. That doesn't mean you are able to access and able to play with all the resources present in the server database, right? This is where the term authorization comes in. It also need to be verified that your connection attempt to each resource is allowed or not. To put in simple words, it's the process of asking if you have the access to a certain resource. When a particular user credential gets created at the application side by, say, an admin for example, the user's rights also gets created, like what actions and resources this user is entitled to access. This is what being checked when authorization privileges are verified. I remember an authorization incident that happened when I worked for a product company earlier in my career. My company had a SaaS-based web application which handles data for many of its different client companies. The user credential created for a particular client company was supposed to be restricted to access only of that user's company resources. But unfortunately, in one of our product iteration release, this was broken due to a regression. And as a result of it, a user from one customer was able to read some confidential data that belongs to a totally different customer. Fortunately, this came into our notice and we could fix this authorization issue much quickly before it made any further data breaching issue to our other customers. So friends, it emphasizes that the importance of authorization when we design an API or a service. And as a tester, we should always keep both of our eyes into it. Okay, friends, let's get into the demo to understand more about authorization from a practical point of view. So, we know that once you get successfully authenticated to a server, you should not be allowed to do everything at the server, right? You should be able to do only what is being allowed. If you have a certain privileges assigned, you should be restricted strictly to that. Whatever privileges are not assigned to your credential, you should not be able to do that. It could be either reading a resource or could be deleting a resource or could be updating a resource or anything. So authorization is really important. You should be able to do only what is being allowed for you to do, even if you are a genuine user for the application. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to use GitHub's personal tokens feature. So it's another way of authenticating yourself to GitHub server. So earlier we were using username and password to authenticate to GitHub, right? Now we will use username and personal tokens. So using this also, you're sending a basic authentication to GitHub, but instead of password, you would be giving personal token. So at the GitHub side, if you go to any account settings, you can create personal tokens. So if you go to developer settings page, there is an option for creating personal tokens. So here you can generate tokens and you can assign privileges for that token. So you will be restricted so that you will be able to do only those assigned privileges. So I'll just demo that very quickly here. So if I use test, so I can see the, you can see that you can select scopes, what all you can do with this token. So I can select repo, and I can decide that I don't want to delete a repo with this token. So I can select whatever I want and click on generate token. So this will generate a token. This is going to be a secret one. Only now you would be able to see it. So you should copy it. So anyway, I'm going to delete this. I'll be using already created tokens. I had two tokens here. So I'm going to use these two tokens and demonstrate how authorization really works from from the practical perspective. So in order to make this demo a bit quicker, I have copied those tokens here. So in the first token, I cannot really delete a repo, but I can update a repo details here. And using a second token, I can delete a repo, but I cannot update a private repo. So these are the privileges assigned to these two tokens. I'm going to demonstrate that. So, and I have these two requests that I'm going to use here. So I'll get into CMD. I'll use curl again. The first request that I'm going to use is delete, and I will pass my username and password. No, I'm gonna pass my username and personal token. Okay, so I'm gonna use this token first, and I'm gonna use this particular request to delete this repo. So when I use this token, we know that we should not be allowed to delete it, right? Let's see. So, and I will use a verbose command. So let's enter. So we can see that GitHub is sending the right response. It is saying must have admin rights to repository. So GitHub is not allowing these credentials to delete a repo. So this is an expected response from GitHub, and we can see that the response code returned is 403. Wonderful. So next I'm gonna use this token to delete the repo. So I'm gonna use this token. So I'm gonna just remove this token, and I'm gonna paste the second token, which should be able to delete a repo. Before that, if you go to my GitHub, you can see this particular repo is available here, right? So this repo is available here. So this is the repo. I'm going to delete it. So come back here. Let's press enter. Wonderful. We got a response code of 204. That means that repository might have got deleted. Let's refresh and see this test repo is not there. Refresh. Now it is no more there. One repo less. That means this token was able to delete a repo. So let me use one more command, one more request to demonstrate authorization. So we have a request endpoint to update a particular repo details. So I'm going to use this request. So for that, again, I'm going to use curl. The kind of request I'm going to use is patch, and I'm going to use token called this one. So let's see. So, and I'm gonna hit on this particular one. Let's add. So with this token, we know that we should not be able to update the repo details, right? So this is my private repo called JS Learning. So I just wanted to update the description. So right now it is having some other description. Let's see what is the description it has. JS Learning. Yeah, it has a description called this is a JS Learning repo. So this is what we are going to we are trying to update it, but we should not be able to do it with this token. So let's see, return enter. So it is giving a response saying not found, and the kind of response is for not for. This must be because of the privilege one, because we know that for this particular token, he should not be able to update the resource, right? So now let us use the other token, which should be able to update the private repo details. So let me copy this. I know that I am going in a high speed, but I just wanted to make sure that we are completing this concept quickly so that you can go and practice it, guys. Let's practice it. The more you practice, you will learn it. Learning is always very hard, but if you try, you can learn it. So let's use this. Now we can see that it is no more sending that for not for. It is sending a response code of 200. So we are expecting its description must be updated to this is a just learning repo app. Let's refresh this and see. Yes, wonderful. We can see its description got updated here. So friends, I hope you understand the concept behind authorization. Even if you authenticate successfully to any service, to any server, you should not be allowed to do anything that you want. You should be restricted to what is available or allowed to you. So that is the concept behind authorization and how it is totally different from authentication. And remember that to authorization to work, the authentication has to be always successful. Okay friends, thank you for watching this. Go practice and always try to learn. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.